Welcome back to Management 2020. In this video, we'll talk more about paragraph structure. So we'll try to answer the question, why do we need paragraphs? And how do we create audience-focused paragraphs? We'll talk about the main components of a paragraph and how transitions can help make paragraphs more readable. So I want you to take a look at this piece of writing or this text here, and just without even really reading it, just how do you feel just even looking at it? Now here's the same text. This time, instead of being a block of text, every paragraph is, or every sentence is its own paragraph. Again, what are your feelings about this? So here's the same text that is organized into paragraphs. Now, even if you didn't have time to read through either of those examples, just looking visually at them, it is likely that the third example was the more comfortable for you, the more to help you recognize how information is organized, and that there are really three main ideas. In fact, this one is skimmable. We can look at the topic sentence of each paragraph or the first sentence and know that this is a market analysis. And then they take a look at the competitive brands and try to figure out what their competitive edge is, and then what is their plan going forward. It's much easier to identify this versus this or this. The paragraph format allows us to quickly identify this is probably part of a business plan, but it's really hard to quickly identify that that's what those paragraphs are when we see it in these other forms. So even just in a visual sense, paragraphs make language or written text more consumable. And there's both a visual aspect to that, but then also a logical aspect to that. We usually organize similar ideas into paragraphs, and that helps us digest or process and remember that information. So paragraphs really help with this concept of cognitive load, right? Cognitive load is our brain's ability to process information and then be able to retain it. And we have this concept of short-term memory and long-term memory. And short-term memory is we're processing things as they happen, and then long-term memory helps store that information for eventual retrieval in the future. And when things aren't written in paragraphs, we can have harder information initially processing that information, but then it's also can be more difficult to retain that information because we don't have these logical, manageable chunks of information. And as we already mentioned, information that is organized into meaningful paragraphs tends to be more skimmable because we can use strategies like reading the first sentence, which is often a topic sentence, to get the main idea of a text without having to read all of the details. So let's talk a little bit about the connection between audience and paragraphing. Now, as we've said, some of the main points that make business writing different than other kinds of writing is that it is clear, concise, and audience focused. Now, it's not to say that other writing isn't those things, but those are probably the main priorities with business writing. And so, because audience focus is so important here, we need to understand our audience before we start writing so that we're writing the information that's going to be appropriate for our audience. So, when we analyze our audience, we need to think about what are the personal details of our audience? What is their background information? What are their demographics? Information about our audience can help us understand how to present language to them. And additionally, what prior knowledge are they likely to have? So, if I'm writing a business report, I want to think about who that report is for, what information they already know about what I'm about to write, and what information they don't know. So I know where to spend more time giving details, explaining important terms, and where I don't have to do that because the audience already knows that information. It's also important to consider our audience's goals. What do they want out of the text that we're preparing? What do they need out of that information? And how can we present that information to fulfill their needs? And then that connects also to this idea of expectations. How do they expect information to be presented? And this gets into the idea where in business writing, we tend to try to use very similar organizational styles or templates for information because our audience expects to be able to get into text quickly, identify the information they need, and then get out of the text so they can apply that information. And so we need to understand what their expectations are for how we should organize information, and then try to match the information we have with their expectations for how it should be organized. So let's get into talking about a specific paragraph. Now, you have lots of experience writing paragraphs already in your life, but some of that may be less conscious information about how it works, right? You may know how to do it, but you may not be able to explain how to do it. And sometimes being more explicit about what a paragraph has can help us write future paragraphs more concisely and more clearly. So generally, most sentences will begin with a topic sentence. Now, the first sentence isn't always a topic sentence. Sometimes there's transition, sometimes there's background, but it's usually near the beginning, almost always the first sentence. And that topic sentence identifies the main idea of a paragraph. What is the goal of this paragraph? What main point does it try to communicate to the audience? And then generally, everything else in the paragraph is just supporting information to help clarify that main point. So we shouldn't be including lots of new information. Instead, we should be elaborating on the main idea that's explained in that topic sentence. So we call the body paragraphs really supporting sentences. As we mentioned, there may be definitions of key terms or concepts, depending on whether or not our audience already knows the concepts that we've introduced in that topic sentence. There may be explanations or details. If we're writing about a process, then we may want to explain how that process works. If we're talking about the advantage of a particular business approach, then we may detail what some of those advantages are. We may also include some examples, illustrations, support. If we're doing academic writing, then we're also going to probably include references and citations to other articles that help support what we're saying in our main idea or our topic sentence. Lastly, we may include a summary sentence. Summary sentences are helpful because by the time the reader has gotten through all of those details, examples, explanations, we are reminding them before they leave the paragraph, here's what you were supposed to learn. Especially if this paragraph is part of a larger text, maybe, for instance, an essay or maybe a business proposal where there is more of a argumentative, persuasive goal to the text, then that summary sentence can connect the idea of the main or the topic sentence back to the overall purpose of the text, the essay or the proposal, and sort of reinforces this is why I've told you this, because it connects to the main idea that I'm trying to convince you of in the entire proposal or in the entire essay. So topic sentence, body sentences that are these supporting sentences, and then a summary sentence at the end. You won't always see a summary sentence. And in fact, one of the criticisms of early generative AI, like ChatGPT version 3, is that it would always throw in a summary sentence that seemed almost redundant. I think it's getting better, but still, I think there's value in summary sentences, but it's usually the value is in connecting them to the larger idea. So here is a paragraph for us to look at. And we want to see to what degree this paragraph does what we talked about. Is there a topic sentence? Are there supporting sentences? Is there a concluding sentence? So we start off here with this market analysis indicates a significant and growing opportunity within the specialty beverage sector, particularly in the health-conscious consumer segment. Okay, a topic sentence. So it's identifying this idea that there is this area for growth within this market. I'd like you to, if you like, pause the video, go through and read the rest of the paragraph and ask yourself, what are these sentences functioning as? What are they providing? Are they fulfilling that model that we've looked at of a paragraph? So there's our topic sentence. And then we have some of these detailed sentences that provide some specific information or background on the topic. Here's another one, okay, that focuses more on this target demographic that they will try to focus on. and providing more information about why this target demographic is a good match for the product that they're going to offer. So it doesn't have necessarily a very strong concluding sentence. And again, as we talked about, that's not always necessary, can sometimes be helpful. But there's a clear topic sentence, and then there's these supporting sentences that help clarify the idea, provide support or explanations. Here's another one. Again, same thing. If you want, pause the video, read the sentence yourself, and ask yourself, does this have a topic sentence? Does it have supporting sentences? Does it have a summary sentence? So here's what we would see as a topic sentence. Okay. And then it's got these other additional sentences that provide support in favor of that topic sentence about sort of establishing this competitive market. What are other options? How do they differentiate themselves from the competition? So, as we mentioned, topic sentences generally, or paragraphs usually generally begin with a topic sentence and then have supporting sentences. They may have a summary sentence at the end that kind of reminds the reader what was the purpose of this paragraph and how does it connect to the larger goals of the whole text. So let's talk a little bit about this concept of transitions that comes up in your textbook reading. One thing I want to make clear is that transitions should usually be more than just a word. They should be about summarizing ideas and connecting one idea in a paragraph or a text with the next idea in a paragraph and a text. Sometimes when we see these list of transition words, like those that were provided in your textbook, there's a sense all I have to do is just throw in some transition words and my text is going to be more cohesive and easier to understand. And reality is no. Sometimes if you throw in transition words, particularly if they're not good transition words for the concepts you're explaining, they make your text more difficult to understand. So we're going to look at some examples and talk about the pros and cons of using transitions and also the advantage of using kind of summary statements as a way to help transition between text. So here is a paragraph where they're comparing some software and they use some of those transition or signal words that show contrast. However, on the other hand, and yet. These are appropriate for the type of paragraph that's being written here because it's trying to switch back and forth between talking about two options and what is one option versus another option. But they are just transition words on their own. They've been used effectively. I don't think this makes the paragraph more difficult to understand, but there are ways to do transitions more effectively than just throwing in a transition word. So if we'll look here, on the left, we have a paragraph that has maybe one transition word, then it's trying to describe a process. And if you want, you can pause the video and read that paragraph yourself. On the right side is the same paragraph, but what has been added in between sentences are summary statements that summarize the idea of the previous sentence and then transition it to connect it with the idea of the next sentence. So if we see there, the first paragraph is about items coming off of the assembly line and they go through a diagnostic scan. So then the second sentence says, once the unit has passed this initial scan, then this happens. Okay. And then the next sentence again summarizes the idea from the second sentence. At this stage where technicians look for cosmetic defects, then this next thing happens. So sometimes that can be really helpful for readers if they're working in something very new or very technical, and you want to make sure you guide them carefully through the paragraph. Those types of summary sentences can help. Here's another one. This time, instead of describing a process, it's describing effects. So the first one doesn't have any of these summary statements in them, but the second one does. Okay, it finds a way to summarize in just a few words the main concept from the previous sentence and then connect it to the next sentence. The original one just uses words like this or it. And the problem with words like this or it is the reader might not know what this is referring to exactly or what it refers to. And so sometimes replacing those simple pronoun phrases with a more detailed phrase that reminds the reader what they just read about can be a better transition between concepts. Here's an example of doing this not within a paragraph, but between paragraphs. So you'll see the topic sentence of the second paragraph. The first part summarizes what the previous paragraph was about. That's the underlined portion. And then the part in bold introduces the topic of the new paragraph. And so it's connecting the previous paragraph with the next paragraph by using these short summary statements. This can be an effective way to help guide readers through text. It does make text a little bit longer when we do this, right? And so again, this is this balance between trying to be concise, but also trying to be clear by guiding the reader and reminding them of what they're reading and how it connects. So as writers, we have to make these choices. Is it worth providing these summaries? Or is it not necessary because we've written clear enough, the concept's familiar enough, we can just move on with the next topic. So in this video, we talked about why we need paragraphs. We talked about making sure our paragraphs are audience focused and the things we should consider when we're writing paragraphs. We talked about the main structure of paragraphs and how transitions can help guide the reader within a paragraph, but also between paragraphs. Please let me know if you have any questions about the concepts that we've discovered that we have discussed in this video.